As required, it's time for your yearly fire extinguisher refresher course. Now, it's understood that you've already learned everything that's going to be in this video, but like all of these refresher courses, the information is very important and it's easy to forget over the course of a year. We'll keep this very simple, but as always, you should spend time throughout the year keeping up to date on this information. Now, let's start with what we're here to talk about.
The objectives we need to touch on are the types of extinguishers and what their different uses are, regulatory agencies like OSHA and the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, approval agencies, inspections, and uses of extinguishers.
In order to classify the different types of extinguishers, we must first identify and label the kinds of fires that they're used on.
Letters are used to categorize each type of fire. A is for ordinary combustible fires or flames. B, these involve any kind of flammable liquid and/or gases. C, electrical fires. D, fires involving any sorts of metals. And K, cooking appliances that involve a cooking media like grease.
Okay, now that we've roughly looked at the types of fires, let's take a closer look at each one and discuss the agents used to extinguish each.
We'll start with Class A, ordinary combustibles. This includes things like paper, wood, and cloth. The agents used to fight this type of flame would be water, a multi-purpose dry chemical, or a halon greater than 9 pounds. Next is Class B. It covers flammable liquids like gasoline, kerosene, or fuel oil, and it also includes gases like propane. The agents used to fight this type of flame are a multi-purpose dry chemical, a dry chemical, purple K, halon, and foam. Now we'll look at Class C. This consists of anything that has electricity running through it, like computers, televisions, and clothing dryers. The agents used against this type of threat are, again, a multi-purpose dry chemical, a dry chemical, carbon dioxide, and halon. Next is Class D, which consists of combustible metals like magnesium, titanium. Here you would need either sand or a Class D extinguisher. And finally, we have Class K, which involves cooking media. This type of fire would involve things like grease or cooking oils. The agents used here are ones that are either wet or dry chemical-based.
Okay, that covers the classifications of fires and what you would use to fight them. Now let's take a look at the actual fire extinguishers that are being produced.
The most common is a stored pressure extinguisher. They include water, foam, dry chemical, and wet chemical. Others are Halon 1211 extinguishers and Halon 1301 extinguishers, cartridge-operated ones that use a dry chemical and carbon dioxide extinguishers that are self-propelling.
Again, the stored pressure extinguisher is the most common. It's pressurized with nitrogen stored in the same chamber as the extinguishing agent.
The type of propellant depends on the agent. For instance, if it is a dry chemical extinguisher, then, as we previously said, nitrogen is typically used. But if it were a water or foam extinguisher, the expellant would be air. Because these units are so common, let's take a quick look at what the inside of one looks like. You can see on this diagram that the extinguishing agent sits in the bottom of the cylinder while the inert gas stays above it. The locking pin and seal need to be removed to activate the lever, which will engage the unit and expel the discharge out through the hose and nozzle. The gauge on top will inform the user of the pressure remaining in the cylinder. On a side note, stored pressure extinguishers in the United States can be classes A, B, C, BC, or D.
So why aren't all extinguishers just stored pressure units? Well, they all have a purpose. For instance, you'd find many cartridge-operated extinguishers being used in industrial facilities. Because they contain the expellant gas in a separate cartridge from the extinguishing agent, it makes them much easier to reload, allowing an operator to discharge a unit, get it recharged, and return to the fire in a reasonable amount of time.
Another thing to look for, an extinguisher should have an approval label affixed to it. Look for either the Factory Mutual logo or the Underwriter's Lab logo. Both are shown here on the screen. You may also find a Coast Guard label if a bracket is present.
Now joining us to give us a better understanding of some of the OSHA regulations is Lieutenant Dennis Tinkham. He's the fire inspector here at the City of Brewer. Now Dennis, OSHA regulations say that it's up to employers to keep the monthly inspections of these extinguishers. Could you give us a little idea of what you look for?
Sure thing, Rob. One of the first things that we look for is that the extinguisher is housed either in a cabinet or mounted on the wall. And if it's mounted on the wall, then there has to be some sort of a sign or decal to indicate where it's supposed to be. One of the first things after that we look for is that the extinguisher is actually there, that somebody hasn't removed it to be sent out for service, or that they didn't misplace it. When we actually do the visual check, what we're going to look for is that there's a tag in place to indicate, to sign off every month that the extinguisher has been checked and by who. One of the other things we're going to look for is we're going to check to make sure the pin that holds the extinguisher is in place, and that keeps the extinguisher from being discharged when somebody grabs onto it. We're going to look for the seal that keeps that pin from falling out. We're going to look for the gauge to make sure that the extinguisher is fully charged, and that's indicated by the yellow arrow pointing up into the green. Also that the seal isn't leaking around the neck. We're going to look at the hose and make sure that it's not cracked or frayed and that there's also nothing plugging it. Then we're going to take it out of the cabinet or off the wall and do a quick visual check around to make sure that it's not rusted or corroded and there's no cracks or dents in it. And also we're going to turn it upside down to check the bottom. What that does too is it gives us a chance to shake it a little bit to make sure that the chemical inside doesn't become caked in the bottom.
Could you just tell us a little bit about the maintenance required on these extinguishers?
Sure thing, Rob. Every 6 years, the chemical that's inside has to come out and be changed out for a fresh chemical. And then every 12 years, a hydrostatic test is required where they take all the chemical out, they take the neck and hose off, and then they pressurize the extinguisher to make sure that there aren't going to be any leaks, so that the pressure required to discharge the chemical in the event that the extinguisher has to be used is going to be able to be maintained.
One more quick point is to make sure that older, obsolete extinguishers are no longer in service. This includes units constructed of copper or brass and joined together by soft solder or rivets.
Now that we've discussed OSHA standards for fire extinguisher inspections, here's a few other standards that are important to note.
NFPA 10 pertains to the selection, installation, inspection, maintenance, and testing of portable extinguishing equipment. OSHA Subpart L explains the standard minimum requirements for organizing, operating, training, and equipping industrial fire brigades.
The last thing is the use of the fire extinguisher. Know what the tool is used for. Portable extinguishers are meant to fight or control small fires, often in emergency situations. It is not intended for use on any out-of-control fire, such as one that has reached the ceiling or one that endangers the user by cutting off one's escape routes. And of course, to use one, remember the simple acronym PASS. Pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep.
That's right, Rob. Here you go. Pull the pin, aim it at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, and sweep from side to side.